Again, so welcome. We're delighted to have you here at the Lubar Center today. This is On the Issues. As you know, this is our continuing series of conversations with news and policymakers. People are doing interesting, important work in this region and beyond. And today we are joined by the president and CEO of the Boys and Girls Clubs of Greater Milwaukee, Vince Lyles. Let me just tell you a little bit about Vince, and many of you in this room know him. He's a guy who grew up in Milwaukee and has spent a lot of years in this city. He went to law school, I hate to say this, at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. I really don't hate to say that. I went to school at the University of Wisconsin-Madison too, and he had his first professional job here in Milwaukee as an assistant DA. I don't know if many of you folks knew that. He's worked in the public sector. He was a city election commissioner under Mayor John Norquist, worked in the mayor's office for a couple of years. He has been in the private sector. He was a director at Robert W. Baird, the investment company, giving advice to municipalities and the school districts and all that stuff. He was the guy who ran M&I Bank's Community Development Corporation. And since 2012, he's been with the Boys and Girls Clubs. And today we're going to talk about the club's mission, we'll talk about the work he's doing, what he sees in our city today. So won't you please give a warm welcome to Vincent Lyles. Good to have you here. Thank you. So we'll talk about the mission, the work of the clubs in just a moment, but I want to begin with a question about the state of our city's kids and how they're doing. And I saw a piece that you and Jim Clark, the current national president of the Boys and Girls Clubs, wrote back in August. It was on the one-year anniversary of the Sherman Park unrest. And you talked about our kids, both in the nation and in this community, struggling and in crisis. You have an interesting perspective on the young people in this city. What do you see from where you sit?
You know, I see a number of different things. I see how poverty as a overlay for all these things that affect our kids is really taking a toll in Milwaukee in particular. We cannot continue to see our kids be their best and brightest if they don't have the resources that they need, right? They are getting some resources in some locations, but across the board, we're struggling as a community to really serve our young people in the most meaningful way we can. But through the, as the story goes, through the concrete, there are roses that aspire, right? There are roses that are happening over at Ricardo School, right, the UCC. There are roses happening at schools within MPS. There are roses happening and blooming in all kinds of places across our city. I see Jim Pyatt up there from Mesmer. He's doing some great work with our kids. But it's a struggle. It's a real struggle. Their families are in crisis around a lot of different things. Certainly the economics of it, but also kind of their belief in their own futures is being questioned. And so you see it played out in a number of different ways. You see the neglect happen, and you certainly see that in a more stark way with our kids who are in poverty. But the other opposite side of it is you see a lot of kids now who are taking themselves out of the equation way too early. And obviously we call it, some of us who are reading about that and see it, think about it as kind of the opiate crisis and other things, but they're taking themselves out. Nobody's injecting these drugs or forcing these kids to take the drugs, but the kids are doing it, right? And
is that because of hopelessness?
I think it is. I think this country is the foundation of this country. What makes this place so special, and the reason people want to travel 300 miles in the hot desert sun across Mexico is because this is a place of opportunity. This is a place of hope. This is a special place, this country, right? And when you get here and you don't have that hope, I think you start checking out pretty quickly. So it's unfortunate, but again, continue to kind of hold on. My aunt passed away this week, and one of the songs they sang at the funeral was a song called Hold On to God's Unchanging Hand. And I think you really do have to hold on tight to God's unchanging hand, or whoever your spiritual lifter is because it is, in many places, pretty discouraging.
I was taken, though, by your comment about the roses coming up through the concrete.
Jeffrey Canada, I think, talks about the book.
Yeah. I think that you have said that, despite the challenges our kids face, they are resilient. They have the ability to do great things, and we just have to, as adults, pay a bit more attention to them and what's going on in their lives.
Yeah. Some of the best work we do at the Boys and Girls Club is with our teens, and we have a theme for that we call Can You Hear Us Now? And it's really about listening to kids and helping them work through the issues that they're dealing with. And we put on a theatrical performance every spring around those issues. But I certainly see it with my own kids, right? I have 19 and 16-year-old daughters, and they know you're right? I mean, kids, they know you're right.
Are you sure about that?
Yeah, they do. They know you're right, but they want to be heard, right? They want you to hear them. Can you hear me now, right? You empowered me with this ability to talk and to think and to do things. Are you listening to what I have to say? Right? And the resiliency is, nothing short of amazing, right? We have some kids who, they've been through a lot. They come to the clubs, but they keep coming. And I have a colleague in Buffalo who said to a group of us one day, he said, you got to think about this like a talent competition, right? He said, every day that kid walks up and down the street to get to your club, he's walking past a whole bunch of other people. And you happen to win that day. But one of those days, somebody else may capture his or her imagination or his attention, right? And then they got him, right? And you think about the drug dealer, he's always looking for people in his army, always, because he knows they're going to get caught. That's part of the game. You get caught selling drugs. All the police know who you are, and so he has to replace his people all the time. So he's looking for some of my kids. And so that resilience to kind of fight back against some of that is pretty remarkable. Our Youth of the Year is a young man named Brandon Pope, and Brandon, talked about his mother and her recovery, very openly. And how he had to give her shots to get her healed. And I'm thinking to myself, when he was doing this, he was 9 years old. You're 9 years old and you have to kind of be the quote unquote man of the house? Yeah, they're pretty damn impressive.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk about the mission.
Yeah.
So in this year, 2017, what is the mission of the Boys and Girls Clubs? And has it changed even in recent years?
Well, the mission continues to be helping kids who need us most. I mean, that's our overall mission, but we've always got to change. We've got to evolve. The things we did in 2000, even 2012, some of that stuff's just not relevant to kids anymore. It just isn't, right? We've got to be prepared to do things differently. The fundamental part of our mission is relationship building. If you listen to any of the celebrities who happen to, talk about their experiences at Boys and Girls Clubs, and I always use the Denzel Washington story, but Denzel talks about a guy named Billy Taylor, right? And Billy Taylor gave him the confidence to be an actor, not to act, but he said, think about it. I'm a kid growing up in Mount Vernon, New York, I think is where he's from. Back in the 60s, and I'm telling all my buddies in my family I'm going to be an actor, and they look at me like, what, are you crazy? You're going to be an actor? There's one black guy on TV then, that was Bill Cosby. Right? You ain't nobody else coming on, right? And so what our staff does is the same, right? In terms of that relationship building, but the tools they use have to be different.
Let's talk about just what an incredibly big operation this is. There may be people in this room who don't know just how large the Boys and Girls Clubs are and what a significant role they play. Today, how many clubs do you have operating in the city?
So we have 51 clubs that are operating in the city of Milwaukee.
And they're in, you and I were at one a couple of years ago. This is a school on the south side, near South Side. But where are these clubs?
They're all over, primarily in the city of Milwaukee. We have 2 clubs that are outside the city. One is in, actually 2 now, is in Brown Deer. Actually, the Brown Deer School District has invited us in to serve the kids in that district. And then Hatfield School is in Waukesha, Waukesha School District. And then we have Camp Whitcomb-Mason, which is also in...
Is that at Heartland or...
Yeah, just outside Heartland, just outside the town of Merton. Mm-hmm. It's about almost 300-acre campsite that we have. But everything else is in the city. And some MPS, primarily MPS, about 36, I think, are MPS. And then the rest are either choice or charter schools. We are in churches. We are in county buildings. We're in the Housing Authority building, City of Milwaukee spaces. We are where the kids are. You know, that's how we evolved as an organization. You know, I give this board a lot of credit. About 15, 20 years ago, they said, we're going to get out of the brick and mortar business. Mm-hmm. Right? And if you're going to be out of the brick and mortar business and you're not going to build these things, you know, then you got to go find the customers. The customers are in the buildings. And luckily for us, we are positioned well as an organization to kind of go out and pursue these opportunities. But even on our best day, we serve about 5,000 kids a day. There's still another, you know, probably 80, 90,000 kids out in the city of Milwaukee who are someplace else between the hours of 3 and 7.
How many employees now?
How many employees we have today, Tammy? About 700, 800? That's our CFO. She keep an eye on me. That's why she's here.
700 or 800 employees. And literally well over 1,000, couple thousand volunteers?
Yeah, we're about 3,000 volunteers annually, 700, 800 employees. We are so fortunate. We've been in this community for 130 years, and this community has responded in a very positive way to what the clubs are all about. We get calls all the time from people who want to help. We've got great partnerships and collaborators. I see my friend Melinda Scrady over there in the corner. Melinda runs Pius Catholic High School, by the way, and does a phenomenal job working with our young people who attend Pius. So, you know, it's a lot of work, but a lot of hands make light work.
So you're talking about the relationship building aspect of this, and I wondered if you go into some more detail about the kinds of programs that are currently available. You said even things you were doing in 2012, you're doing perhaps differently today. Are there new things? Tell us about what you're offering the kids who come to your club.
Sure. Great example is around the arts. You know, 5 years ago, we were, you know, this may sound a little bit demeaning, but we were more popsicle sticks and googly eyes, right? Which is fine, right? I mean, in the grand scheme of things, no one who comes to the clubs is necessarily the next Michelangelo. But what we saw was an opportunity to potentially bring professional artists into the neighborhoods. Right? And we were fortunate enough to land a grant through the Boys and Girls Clubs of America and our affiliation with them to bring in professional artists. So we have a guy by the name of Cedric Gardner, who is our dance instructor over at the Davis Boys and Girls Club. Davis Boys and Girls Club, for those of you who don't know, is at 24th and Rogers, near South Side. And Cedric is a kid who grew up in Milwaukee, went away, but he learned how to dance. And he's really good at it, and that's how he makes his living. And so through Cedric's work over the last couple of years, year and a half, 2 years, you know, we have a real dance program now, right? So much so that Cedric took a group of our kids to the Monsters of Hip Hop competition in Chicago back in the spring. And the kids did well enough that they got invited to the National Monsters of Hip Hop competition. And see Alexander back there. She knows about it. Out in LA. And our kids ended up coming in second place. 2 of our kids were part of one of the old Navy commercials that you see on TV now. Right. So we've got 2 kids who now have an agent, right? Yeah.
Are they hard to deal with? Yeah, I bet they are.
They're a little hard to deal with. But, you know, that's an example of what's happened in our organization. We have a a couple other sports genres, arts genres. So the other day, I'm at our Fitzsimmons Club, which is at 34th and North. The guy who runs that program is a guy named James Gavins, and James is a kid who grew up in Chicago, went to school in Madison, came to Milwaukee to work for us. And so I'm in the club, I'm taking a donor on a tour, and we're in the room where James is, and there are about 14 kids sitting there, they're probably 12, 14 years old, and they're on a Skype conversation with Daveed Diggs. Everybody seen this play called Hamilton? So Daveed Diggs is one of the stars of Hamilton, talking to our kids in Milwaukee, right? That's cool to me, right? That's really special and different. And I said to James, I said, hey, how'd you get Daveed Diggs on the Skype? He said, well, he and I, we were both part of this first wave program that University of Wisconsin has to try and celebrate art as a career and helping kids get through college using that form. And he's my friend, so anytime I call him, he said, you want me to call him right now? I'll call him. I'm like, dude, not for me, but if I tell Miranda, my daughter, that she knows Daveed Diggs, he'd be all over that. But long story short, we've come a long way because we've had to. We have a business that is a drop-in business, guys. Nobody gets court ordered to come to the Boys and Girls Club. So we've got to stay relevant. We got to stay current. We can't pretend like we are, some places kids are automatically going to show up to. We got to be different. We got to be relevant. One of the reasons I took this job is, I was joking with my friend Ricardo back over there, but I called him when I was contemplating taking this job, and Ricardo said to me, he said, Vincent, if you take this on, you have to want for these kids exactly what you want for your own kids. And so that's what I use as a part of our mission and our drive and my vision for what we can be. We can be better. We can do more. Why not? These kids deserve this. They absolutely deserve everything we can muster out of ourselves to do it for them.
The arts, athletics, education.
Education.
I think the school we were at that day, there was a room where kids could do homework. They were doing their homework together.
Yeah, we've gotten better at that, right? Historically, we had Power Hour. Power Hour is basically kind of an hour after school where you get your homework done. Well, today's kid is, not running around carrying a piece of paper and pencils anymore, right? So we've gone online and tried to do some things there. We've also tried to become more ingrained in the school day. Historically, little Michael could say, well, I don't have any homework. And we at the Boys and Girls Club would go, yeah, I guess you're right, you don't. Okay, well, let's just do something else. Well, if you're part of the school day, you also learn that, well, he or she may not have any homework. There are some things they're working on. And part of what we need to do in our school system, whether it's choice, charter, or public, is we've got to continue to find ways to give kids more confidence to show up, right? There's a lot to be said about showing up every day. And, I think I can count on my hand the number of times I've missed school, right? One of my classmates from high school is here, Myra Edwards, and she and I, both our mothers are teachers, so we didn't get a chance to miss school at all.
I had that same.
At all, right? My girl, we didn't miss school. I tell people all the time, I went to summer school every year from the time I was in third grade to the time I was my second year of law school. Every summer I went to summer school, right? School was what you did. School, in my parents' mind, was the antidote. That's how you're going to get out of whatever it is you want for this world, is education.
So have we lost that? I actually sometimes, when people ask that question about, I grew up the same way. I'm a little bit older than you are, but we're not too far away in age, and that was the mantra. With education, anything is possible. Yeah. Have we lost sight of that?
To some extent, right? Sure, we've still got the best universities in the world, and we still have some programs that we do exceptionally well. But across the board, there is a little bit of what I call, and my wife is here, Bethany, and she's heard me say this a little bit. There's a little bit of what I call the microwave generation. We want solutions to problems to happen right away, right? Well, you know, they're not going to happen right away, first of all. And then second of all, you got to put in some work, right? You think you're going to lose weight because you kind of walk past a piece of cake? No, that's not how it works, right? We really got to put in some work here. And I think education was that platform where some of that happened. And because of the challenges, either related to the financial impacts of it, our attitudes about what happens in an education environment, where it's a little bit been diminished to some degree, that's not important. Well, it is important, and it's going to continue to be important. And there just being different ways of learning, but it's okay. I mean, I remember one of the things I read a while ago was a book called Don't Bother Me, Mom, I'm Learning. It was all about how technology teaches kids, right? You think things like Game of Thrones and all the stuff the kids play on these PS2 systems, and also probably PS4 now, right? All that stuff. Talks about strategy and talks about, planning and all that kind of stuff. Those are ways to learn. And why not use those tools? But some of us are kind of stuck, right? We don't want to change. We think it's okay to kind of keep doing it the same way they're doing it. And then we wonder why kids don't come.
Mm-hmm. The size of this chapter of the Boys and Girls Clubs, it's arguably the largest chapter in the United States.
Yeah.
Why is that? Does it say something about the need here, or how do you explain that? That's fascinating to me.
Well, it's outstanding leadership.
That's called teeing it up, Just put it right up there and let them just smack it out.
No, we've been in Milwaukee for 131 years now, right? And Milwaukee has, we were fortunate enough, a woman by the name of Annie Whitcomb and some friends started the organization over at the old Plymouth Church on the Near East Side here in Milwaukee, just to try and serve kids in tenements. And corporate Milwaukee bought in. And then we're smart enough to kind of get out of the bricks and mortar business, so that allowed us to have more leverage when we're out trying to expand. There is a need in Milwaukee, but there's needs all across the country, right? There's needs in every city, every rural area. I mean, what people don't really know about the Boys and Girls Clubs nationally or internationally is that we're on every military base where there are American families has a Boys and Girls Club. We're on 200 Indian reservations. So Boys and Girls Club is an international brand. Milwaukee has always been at kind of the top of the Christmas tree as it relates to Boys and Girls Club's activity. And that board that I have, which by the way has got 80 people on it. Yeah, that's what I say, wow. They have high standards. They push us as a staff all the time to do more on behalf of kids. And now that you're out here, you got to keep leading, right? That's why you call on people like Melinda and Ricardo and others to kind of help you do this work, because you got to sustain it and continue to grow it.
Talk a little bit about nonprofits in general. You work for one of the larger nonprofits in this community. There are many in Milwaukee. And the question I have is, yes, there is a lot of good work being done by many different organizations in this city, but do we sometimes row in different directions? Are we all on the same page? Is there enough coordination? Are there too many nonprofits in Milwaukee? Do you have any take on that?
Publicly or privately? We do row in opposite directions, right? And some of it is, again, it's not incredibly wrong to row in different directions, because some kids need this and some kids need that. That's fine. But one of the things I learned early on in my tenure here at the Boys and Girls Club is that kids really just want help. And they don't care whether you got a blue shirt on, a yellow shirt on, a green shirt. They don't really make any difference to them, right? And so what we've got to think about is what's in the best interest of the people we're trying to serve, right? Some people ask that question about whether we have too much because they think about it from a lens of scarcity in terms of resources. Now, we have an abundance of resources, right? So I texted a good buddy of mine, I was telling Mike this a little earlier, what a great week for Wisconsin last week, right? So, Foxconn, Badgers, Packers all win, right? That's a hell of a week for our state, right? But one of the things that's really important for me is that those kinds of things continue to kind of bring hope for the future of our community. And I recognize that that abundance that we have can be shared with people who are ready to accept it. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm trying to get kids ready to accept their future, right? Their future is sustaining Eckstein Hall. That's their future, right? And that doesn't even mean you necessarily have to go to law school, right? But somebody's got to keep the lights on. Somebody's got to keep the place looking nice. Somebody's got to feed the people who come. You know, all that's a part of sustaining what we've created here. And, you know, I'm very bullish on our city. You know, are there issues? Yep. Right? Are there some things that we can work on? Yep. But, you know, some of it is things that, you know, all we have to do is kind of get out of our own way, and they can change.
What do you mean by that?
Well,
get out of our own way?
you know, we get kind of stuck on ourselves, right? We somehow believe sometimes that the Boys and Girls Club way is the only way that this problem can be solved. Right? You know, one of the things that I admire, you know, you guys saw this week that St. Augustine Prep had a grand opening, right, over on the south side. And, you know, my friend Gus Ramirez has been talking about education in this town for 25 years or more. But he eventually decided, I'm going to put my money where my mouth is, right? And, you know, some of this stuff that Gus is doing and others, right, that Howard Fuller's been doing for 40 years, right, is all about people not willing to settle, right? And sometimes what I mean by not getting out of our own way is that sometimes we get very comfortable in our chair. Ooh, these shoes feel really good. I'm gonna keep wearing them, even though they got holes in them. No, you gotta get a different pair of shoes on. Or if you don't get a different pair of shoes, Mike, at least shine up the ones you got. Right? At least shine up the ones. Put a piece of cardboard in them and do something different with them. But don't keep settling for what exists today and think that's the way it's always got to be. I have a coworker who says all the time that one of Milwaukee's most challenging things is that we spend a lot of time talking about what we used to be as opposed to what we could be.
We need to focus on the future, you're saying. Yeah. I'll talk about your career a bit, because I think what you're doing today is an interesting transition from what you were doing just a few years ago. Yeah. You were in the private sector. You were a successful guy in the private sector. What was the appeal of moving from the for-profit world to the nonprofit world? Yeah,
there were a couple things. One, it was, you know, an opportunity of a lifetime to be in my hometown and work on behalf of the Boys and Girls Club. You know, my predecessor, Jim Clark, went off to Atlanta to become the national president of Boys and Girls Club, and he talked me into this job, quite frankly, because I was a little bit reluctant, scared, intimidated. You know, I don't, what the hell, I'll tell you. My wife knows this, and some other people. I almost decided not to go to the second interview. I had made it through the first cut, and there was a second interview, and I decided, I'm not going, I'm scared, I can't do it. And I told the recruiter, I'm not coming. Right? And I woke up the next morning and got all kinds of messages from her saying, hey, you got to do this. You wouldn't have made it to second cut. You know? Interview was at 3:30 that day, by the way. Right? And I am so thankful that I, you know, had the courage to kind of move forward and do this. One of the other things that motivates me is that my wife said to me when our oldest daughter was born that you got to be a good man, right? And she said, because your daughter's going to marry somebody like you. I was like, stick my chest out, right? But what she said was that there's a very shallow pool of men that you think are going to be men that you think are worthy of your daughter. Yep. And I think about that all the time in this job, is that my job is to fill up that pool so that there are men and women worthy of our kids. Whoever your kids are, wherever they are. That's important to me, right? What I did over the last 56 years, yeah, good, nice, thank you, appreciate it, right? But what I hope I was able to do was to, create some level of a foundation and a way of life that somebody wants to continue and emulate. And again, they can do it differently than I did it, but certainly try and do something like that so that the ones who come behind me get the benefit of some of the stuff that I got from the people who came in front of me. I mean, I told you about my aunt passing away this week. So my aunt was 92 years old, grew up in rural Mississippi. And she was, like my mother, very headstrong. But she and her 2 sisters and 4 brothers all went to college, all got advanced degrees, right? All were leaders or first in their communities in certain respects around education for the most part. Right? And so I was inspired by that, right? And the number of people who came to the funeral who talked about, Miss Minor did this for me, Miss Minor did that. She started a 4-H program in Gary, Indiana, right? 4-H in Gary, Indiana, really? Yeah, she did. 4-H program in Gary, Indiana, right? And, it was just, I've been very fortunate to see great role models do some really, really cool things, and I'm, trying to keep the torch burning.
So a couple practical questions.
Yep.
The business world, what did you learn from it that you took to the nonprofit world?
Oh, man, so much. I worked for 2 really, really, just 2 of the best organizations that you could work for. I got a chance to work for Robert W. Baird, and, just a really, really great company. At that time, when I first got there, we owned, Northwestern Mutual owned 88% of the stock. And over time, we as the employees bought the stock back. And so you really had a sense of ownership, right? So everything was important at Robert W. Baird. And so I learned a lot from those guys about kind of how you run a business, what you need to do to earn a living. And then I went over to M&I, which is another fabled company in our history, not just Milwaukee's history, but our country's history. It's a great, great bank. And learned from just some incredible people. The golden rule. You guys remember Dennis Kester. One of the things Dennis Kester said to me one time, he said, Vincent, you always, if you look at your day and you got something challenging to do that challenging thing first. Because otherwise you won't do it. And another day will pass, and another day will pass, and you haven't done it, right? And, just stuff like that has allowed me to kind of transfer a little bit of that over to the nonprofit world. Nonprofit world operates at a little different pace, right? Not bad, just different. And I know I frustrate my team a little bit sometimes. A couple of them are here, and they're now all smiling. Because I do tend to kind of want stuff to happen. We just did a offsite with our strategic leadership team, and they kind of did the Myers-Briggs type assessment on us. And smack dab, there he is, the driver. Boom, 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 boom. But, that's because I think it can happen. I vision that it can happen, and I vision the people sitting in front of me can help us make it happen. So, that part of the business world I got and picked up on right away. And I certainly appreciate the other things that, when I talk about Baird and Northwestern, both those companies had a passion for our community. So I appreciate that. They continue to support the work we're doing at the club. So I'm very fortunate in that regard. And a lot of the people who sit on the board of the Boys and Girls Club are business leaders in our town too, so that certainly translates well. So.
Public service, though, has been a part of your life. I mean, when we were talking earlier, Vincent worked at the DA's office here for 3 years, late 80s, early 90s, and also for Mayor Norquist. What did you learn in the public sector?
Oh boy, again, lots of stuff. I was telling a young man who walked me to your office Corey, that one of the things that was really neat about working in the public sector was this idea of, it's almost like an experimental lab on somebody else's dime. You can kind of try stuff and you have to worry about paying for it. And I liked that, right? I enjoyed that. I mean, I remember one of the things we did when I was the election commissioner for the city of Milwaukee, we decided we wanted to try and get out the vote, right? So we came up with this, Carl Miller's firm helped us come up with this ad campaign. And it was get out the vote by any means necessary, right? So we had little buttons with an X on them. Some of you might have one of those buttons. It was not widely successful and actually caused quite a bit of angst and consternation, right? Because it was kind of tied to the Malcolm X movie. So people were like, hey, what you doing, man? Hey. Right. But, the reality of it was that we got to try something and do something different. And it was, exciting for me. When I walked into the Election Commission back in 1992, there was a vault in the office, like a bank vault, with every single registration card of City of Milwaukee residents there was. It was all in one vault, right? So by the time we left, we had, started the modernization period. So again, felt very good about being able to be a part of something like that. Because it's a monumental task, but, we decided to take it on, and, the people that I work with, they understood and they got it and they made a difference in the lives of lots and lots of people. And that's what you can do in these big organizations, is you can transform a lot of lives.
I got to ask you a question about politics and put you on the spot here, but sometimes your name does come up when I talk to people here in town about who would be...
Bethany?
Who would be the next, down the road if the mayor weren't to run for re-election, or if he decided he was, at some point, wasn't going to run? Who would be that person? And sometimes your names comes up in those conversations. So does that hold any interest to you? Could you see a different type of public service at some point? I mean, you've had an interesting career. It could be even more interesting, couldn't it?
I might see a different level of public service. I'm not sure that's the road I want to go down. I readily admit...
It's funny you say that. A lot of people do, that they don't want to go down that road.
Yeah.
Why does that not hold appeal? Because you can affect people's lives in that way.
Yeah, I went to law school primarily because I wanted to be elected official. That was the whole reason I went.
Interesting.
All the people I admired were lawyers. Right? And when I got to Milwaukee in the DA's office, I wanted to run for office at some point in time. And what better place to be in DA's office, get to know a lot of people. And I see my classmate Hannah Dugan back there, who's now a judge. And then City Hall, great, man, I learned everything over here. Right? Well, once you get up close and personal and see it, not so much. Plus, I fell in love with this lady back here, and she said to me one time, she said, honey, if I don't ever have to go to another rubber chicken dinner in my life, I'll be just fine. And so you shift gears. And I still like politics. I follow it fairly closely. I don't, I'm not a truly active participant, but I write a check every once in a while to people that I, believe in. I do think that we are going to have to reform the system. It's not the individuals. The system needs to be reformed. Why can't we have bipartisan group of people making decisions about what the map looks like, right? Why does that go to the, right? Yeah, 50 years ago, it might have made some sense for that to happen, but now it doesn't, right? And those, again, we refuse to get out of our own way around some of this stuff. The system has been corrupted by cash. That was one of the things that kind of turned me off. You know, you think about running for mayor, and, you know, back then the mayor made 140 grand, right? But you got to raise $1 million to make 140 grand. That doesn't make a lot of sense. So, you know, we've got to think about this differently as a society, that our political system needs to change.
It's interesting when you talk to elected officials, people have to run for office on a regular basis. That always comes up. Yeah. How many hours they have to spend on the phone asking for money. Mm-hmm. That it's a huge part of the workday. Yeah. And that's sort of where we are right now. Yeah. So my final question, and we'll take questions from the audience, is this. We've mentioned that you're a guy who grew up here. You went to Madison High School on the Northwest Side. This is home. So, and you've kind of touched on this, but I'll give you a chance to wrap it up here. What would you said we got to get out of each other's way is part of what you would change about Milwaukee, but what's the key to making this a better place, to making it the city that we all think it can be? Is there something beyond getting out of the way? Is there something that you feel we could be doing right now as a community that would move us forward?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, I think, real dialogue about the issues that affect us, I think are really important, right? You know, and this may get me in trouble, but, you know, the issue is not kneeling for the national anthem. The issue is that there are young black men who are dying in our streets, guys. That's the issue, right? And we need to have a dialogue about that issue, right? Healthcare reform. It's way too expensive to be able to utilize our healthcare system, the greatest system in the world, and it basically, in theory, has kind of locked out a lot of people from it, right? You know, some of you know I'm on the board here at Marquette University, and our education system, we've got to think differently about how we deliver.
It's evolving.
Yeah, right, because there are only so many people who have 43 grand a year. Come on, let's be honest here, right? And that doesn't mean you devalue what's going on here for the last 100 years, but just recognize that for the next 100, you may have to do it a little differently. So.
Let me take some questions from the audience. The way we do this, some of you are regulars, so you know, if you're in the seating bowl, please press down on the rim, not on the ball, but on the rim. Keep your finger down on the rim. We'll be able to hear your questions. If you're in the back and you have a question, please raise your hand. Ryan, the gentleman in the, can I call that a checkered shirt, Ryan? It's okay. We'll hold the microphone for you. All we ask is that we don't have speeches, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can. So if you have a question, you're being pointed at, so you must have a question. So.
Mr. Lyles. I'm a club kid. I've been at the Boys and Girls Club since I was 9 years old, and all the programs that I've been able to participate in, I just really appreciate it and everything that the club does. So thank you so much.
Which clubs do you go to, or club do you go to?
I go to the Peeper Hillside Boys and Girls Club,
okay,
which is not that far from downtown. It goes right by my middle school.
And what are you up to now?
Well, right now I'm a senior at Pius, the 11th Catholic High School. And I'm actually applying to Marquette, and I hope to get it. So.
Well, we hope so, too.
That's Pilar Sharp, by the way. So Pilar Sharp and I met when Pilar was probably in 5th grade, 6th grade. And we met because she heard I was a lawyer, and she told me she's going to be a lawyer. So every summer since that time we met, she figured out some way to get herself exposed to the legal profession. So she's going to be a lawyer one day. She is.
Thank you for being here today. Really appreciate it. My question, to that end is, what can young emerging leaders in Milwaukee do to make that change and help the next 100 years of Milwaukee, be better.
Everybody hear that? Okay, so the question is, what can emerging leaders do to make sure that we have a better future? Is that?
Yeah, I like a lot of the things that they're doing now, right? These GoFundMe efforts, right, to raise money for causes that you care about, really important. The fact that you guys are using the technology to connect to one another and connect on these issues, really, really impactful. I remember this is probably 6, 7 years ago now, when there was the uprising in Egypt, right? And Hosni Mubarak said he was going to shut off the internet, and they laughed at him. Like, yeah, go ahead, try and shut off the internet, right? But that's where young people can really make a difference, is using some of these tools to talk about these issues and highlight the pluses and the minuses of these issues. The other thing is that your emphasis and interest in volunteerism is pretty impressive. Again, I only see it really from the Boys and Girls Club eyes or from the Marquette University eyes, but there are lots of young people who are raising their hand and stepping in and want to help. I was telling my wife last night, I got an email from a friend whose son is an 8th grader who wants to come and tutor kids at the club. Well, that's great. That's great. All that kind of stuff can make a difference. So thank you for your interest, and I encourage all of you who are young and young at heart to think about where you can help.
Other questions? Sure.
Hi.
Hi.
I really admire what you've been doing at the Mary Ryan Boys and Girls Club. I just think it's utterly fantastic. And I'm wondering, what is your tax base? I mean, to what extent do taxes in this city support your mission, which is just phenomenal?
Yeah. So 55% of the money that we spend comes from the private sector every year. And then 45% comes from the governmental sector. And so we get, I don't know, Tammy, $500,000 a year annually from the city of Milwaukee to operate our programs. That's a county facility, so more of the support would come from the county. But we've had really great support over time from, local government, and even the federal government, right, has stepped up to support the work that we're doing. We've gotten, the Boys and Girls of America has got a contract, or essentially a contract, with Office of Juvenile Justice Prevention, which is, I think, is in the U.S. Attorney's budget around juvenile delinquency. And then Boys and Girls of Milwaukee has gotten a grant from Department of Education, Health and Human Services. So, as when you have this big operation that you've got to kind of move, you got to kind of raise money in a lot of different ways. And so I'm very fortunate. I've got a great team of people who help us raise money. But if you know something that I don't know and we can get some more, let me know.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, Vincent.
Hello.
So my question is kind of twofold. Number one, one of the things that I know that we struggle in the city with is around keeping and retaining talent, right? So we develop these great leaders, and unfortunately, a lot of them leave us. So number one, I guess thoughts around that and being able to retain them. And number two, what keeps you here? What has kept you here, and what continues to keep you here?
All right. There's some positive efforts going on, right? Social X is doing some great work around keeping folks of color in our community. And Milwaukee, is another one of these organizations, that is trying to keep young people involved and engaged. I think, interesting enough, the recession of 2008 created a little bit of a setback in that world, right? Because all of us lost 40% of our wealth by way of that recession. And so we're hanging around a little bit longer than we probably would have. But, don't be discouraged about some of that, right? Some of what, kind of the old heads like myself can provide are some tips and tools for the trade for you to kind of do it differently and do it better. So I'd encourage you to seek out a few of those people to kind of help you start your own revolution with some of the talent. But, you know, you also have to sell the experience of Milwaukee, right? More and more companies are getting smarter about that, right? So when they're inviting people to Milwaukee, one of the things they're doing is making sure they get to see people like you, Maricela, and others in our community. You know, in the past, people just assume I go work at Rockwell, it's just cool, right? Well, no, you've got, you know, the young professionals, right? They want the experience, right? They want to know where the ice cream shop is. You guys ever heard of this company called Float? Anybody hear Float? This is the wildest thing I've ever heard in my life, right? But for young people, I guess that's kind of a cool thing, right? The fact that we have these, you know, this great music festival in terms of Summerfest, you know, great selling point. The fact that we have a school like Marquette sitting in the middle of our town who is willing to open up itself to the community is a blessing for people that you're trying to attract. And then why do I stay? So when Bethany and I met, I told her, I said, honey, just give me 15 years in Milwaukee. Let me kind of establish myself and get things, and we'll move to Boulder, Colorado, because we had gone to a wedding out there, and she fell in love with Boulder, Colorado. We're almost on year 30 now, so obviously we may not be going. But what keeps me here is you know, great friendships, great people, great experiences. I work for an extraordinary organization in the Boys and Girls Club. I get to see kids, you know, at their best, and see them grow and mature. Again, talk about Pilar. We got thousands of Pilars, right? And I love telling stories about them. You know, it makes me, you know, feel a little bit like a dad to some of these kids, right? And so that's why I'm here. That's why I'll continue to stay. So.
Other questions? Yes.
Hi, thanks
Hi.
for being here. You talked at the beginning about the resiliency that you see in some of the kids who have the opportunity to shepherd along your organization. What do you think is the key to that resiliency, and how can we support kids in our community with building that kind of resilience?
Yeah, no, great question.
How do we build resiliency, greater resilience in our kids who are already pretty resilient?
Yeah,
in some
no,
respects?
you know, you had Paul Tuff here a couple years ago.
We did, yeah.
And, you know, Paul talks about the science, right, around resiliency and all that kind of stuff. I think we got to celebrate some of that resiliency, right? I mean, don't. So, for example, right, I was fortunate enough last Friday, I was over in Detroit. And the reason I was there is because they opened up a facility, Ford Foundation opened up a facility at one of the schools that essentially serves like a resource center for the community, right? So you go in down a corridor, and they have a place where you can get some information about real estate, you know, get some information about legal, get some information, food pantry, all that stuff, right? But in one of the rooms, they also had some kids working on an app. And the app they were working on was to try and reduce absenteeism in their school, right? And one of the ideas that sprung up was, hey, the bus has a GPS system. My buddy's got a phone. How come we can't do the same thing Uber does and track that the bus is 10 minutes away from your house, and if you run out here right away, you know, you'll catch the bus for that day, right? Or one of their friends is the oldest, so she's got to stay home some days. And how come we can't put the screen up in her house and let her be a part of the classroom that day, right? That resiliency is what I'm talking about, right? Let's celebrate the fact that kids want to be a part of something successful. No kid wants to be a bum. You know, don't anybody ever believe that, right? That they set out and plan to be a bum. That doesn't happen, right? They want to be a part of success, and we've got to be a little bit more accommodating and celebratory around the success and resiliency that they do have. So.
Speaking of celebrations, am I right in remembering this? Didn't you do like You know, sometimes when kids announce what schools they're going to play for, you know, when they go off to play basketball or football, there's a news conference and the kids announce where they're going. Didn't you do that with the kids who were going off to college?
Absolutely.
The Boys and Girls Club? You had like a
Absolutely.
celebration of that?
Absolutely, and we stole the idea shamelessly from ESPN. Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, they get these big fat linemen on, I'm going to Wisconsin. So we literally took that same idea and said, okay, I'm heading off to UW Whitewater, right? So we invited Whitewater to town, and they bring the swag, get your hat and your sweatshirt, right? And you sign a little, don't tell them that the letter's fake, but they signed a letter committing to not just going, but graduating, right? When my mom and her aunt were young little girls, they couldn't have gone to Whitewater, right? But today you can go. So now we got to get you to graduation, right? Particularly our boys. We got to get more. We got to fill up that pool, right? National attrition rate for African-American boys is like 11% graduation. That's not going to cut it, right? So getting them to sign, absolutely. Making it fun. One of the things that we found as a great part of that celebration is that little brother and little sister come too, right? I want to be on stage just like you were, right? So.
Yeah, sometimes it's important to just have that moment so that a kid feels good about what he or she has achieved. To recognize it.
Exactly. We've got 40 kids over here at Marquette. You know, they have, Marquette's opened their arms and supported that work, right? We've got, we try and keep them close because we want to give them support if they need it, right? So we'll go to the financial aid office with you. We'll go to the TA meeting with you. Because we want them to graduate. Again, this is really important. This is really important, guys, right? And again, it doesn't always have to be just about college either. I want you to be successful in life. People said, you know, somebody asked me one time, said, you know, what is economic independence? Because we used to talk about economic independence, right? We want kids to be economically independent. So what does that mean? He's smiling. I think he heard me say this before. I said, it means that every year there's Mother's Day, right? And you ought to be able to take your mother out for brunch and not have to ask her for the money. Economic independence. Right?
We are going to wrap things up there. A couple of things before we go. First of all, I always like to take a moment to thank everybody who comes to these events. We are delighted that you're with us. We hope you will come back again. Our next two events are sold out. They're next week, the 18th and the 19th. Amy Goldstein, who is a Washington Post reporter and the author of a really terrific book called Janesville, An American Story, What Happened to Janesville After the GM Plant Closed. She will be with us. And then on the 19th, Alex Lasry, who is a young guy, senior vice president with the Milwaukee Bucks, but a young guy who has moved to Milwaukee and really tried to immerse himself in our community, I should say. Again, we're delighted that you could be with us, and most of all, we want to say thank you to our guest today, Vincent Lyles. Vincent, thank you very much.